Start with leadership, and we got a lot of material to cover because of the short module of 4 weeks rather than 5, and so we're going to try to. I'm going to try to talk less myself in between and see if we can get a couple more in here tonight. So let's pray. Father, we love you. We thank you for your blessing to us. Thank you for working in our lives. Teach us tonight what you would have us to know and understand. Holy Spirit, I ask for your wisdom and your direction. I ask that as we listen to these principles on leadership, that it will change our lives and change our way of operating. We thank you for it. We give you praise for it. And we ask you to have your way in our lives tonight. Anoint what's said and speak deeply to our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so we're on number 12, leadership, law 12, the law of empowerment, which also says only secure leaders give power to others. Only secure leaders give power to others. So let's go ahead and let's watch number 12.
Law number 12, the law of empowerment. And the law of empowerment says only secure leaders give power to others. Only secure leaders give power to others. In your notes, the people's capacity to achieve is determined by their leaders' willingness and ability to empower. Let me illustrate. Every year, I spend time with my nonprofit organization, Equip, traveling internationally. And as I travel to many countries, I teach thousands upon thousands of leaders. What I have noticed, especially in developing countries around the world, is I've noticed that the person in power, the person that has a leadership position, instead of empowering others, and instead of sharing with others, and instead of including others in developing a leadership team, the person in a leadership position, instead of raising up people, in developing countries most often, they try to push down people. Let me illustrate. Come on up here for a moment. My name is John. What's your name? David, come on up here beside me. Let me just illustrate this with David. By the way, David, I wanted to pick out somebody good looking.
I'm going to sit down.
No. No. I just looked around and said, I got to get a good looking guy. That's okay. Now, watch this, David. What I found is too many leaders, and by the way, I don't stop everyone, not only in developing countries. In America, I see this happen all the time. Leaders who have power and have position, taking somebody like David, let's say I'm a leader, I got the power, I got the position. Here's what I see happening all the time, where we take them and we try to push them down. Okay, come on, David. David's theme song is I Shall Not Be Moved. So these leaders, they push them down. You follow me? And their whole thing is, I got to keep pushing my people down. I got to push them down. By the way, have you noticed something? While I'm pushing David down, what's happening to me? I'm going down with him. That's the way it always works, friend. Listen, if you're a leader and you push people down, you just go down with them. It's only a matter of time. Just as if I take David and I start developing him and I say, I'm going to lift him up and I'm going to get him up to a higher level. Now notice now what happened? When I start lifting David up, what happens? I go up with him. Here's what I want you to understand as a leader. You either go up with your people or you go down with your people. And this idea of somehow, I'm going to protect my position, I'm going to push people down. What we don't realize is it eventually is our downfall also. By the way, thanks, David. You did a great job, didn't he? Huh? Give him a hand. He did a great job. Okay, now. David, you and I have been practicing that for months, and boy, it worked out really well. Okay. So you ask yourself the question, I ask myself this question all the time. Again, when I travel and I see this happening in other countries, I ask myself, why is it that the leader insists on somehow being way above his or her people and always is trying to kind of keep everybody, I don't know, they have this kind of like, I don't know, the best way I explain it, almost like a king of the hill mentality. And I got to be on top. Why is it that the people people fail to empower people and give them the energy and the permission and the environment that will help them to be growing and be great leaders themselves. I think there are several reasons we need to discuss quickly. One of the reasons I think we fail as leaders to empower others is insecurity. You show me an insecure leader and I'll show you somebody that will never empower anybody. In fact, let me tell you what's never happened. An insecure leader has never empowered anyone because they're too insecure. They're afraid that somebody else will get their job. What happens if I give somebody a little bit of empowerment and they do a better job than me? Whoa. And that insecurity constantly causes leaders to keep pushing people down. Let me just say this, that I'll flip on real quickly, because I'll start to show my bias, and I don't want to do that. One of the worst days of your life is to be in any organization where you have to follow an insecure leader. Trust me. It's like walking handcuffed through a landmine. It's only a matter of time till they'll blow you and them up together. Insecurity. Insecure leaders do not empower other people. Another reason I think we fail to empower others is a desire for job security. I do know people who I don't think they're insecure, they just want to keep their job. They say, well, if I want to train and empower somebody, they may take my job away from me. Now, what I've always taught, especially in my inner circle, who I've taught all to be leaders, I've always told them it's their job to work themselves out of a job. My thing is equip and train people to take your job. And let me tell you something. If you equip somebody to take your job and you train them, here's the way this works. If you work your way out of a job, I'll give you a medal. I've had key inner circle members that have had 7 or 8 positions in a period of maybe 13, 14 years with me. I mean, they've gone from this one to another because they trained and empowered, and then they've done that, so they don't need to run that, so they go and run another area. I have a wonderful friend of mine who's been with me for over 20 years, Dan Robin. Little of that man, I bet you he has worked himself out of at least a dozen jobs in 20 plus years of being with me. You know what I say to my staff is, you work yourself out of a job, I'll give you another. In fact, here's the way it works with me. If you can't work yourself out of a job, you're smart, aren't you? I'll take the one away from you. You'll lose the job if you can't train someone else to do the job. But I think sometimes we just don't want anybody else to take our job. Another reason I think we fail to empower people is a bad experience. In other words, I'll bet everyone in the studio, and I'll bet everyone listening to this leadership training tape, I'll bet every one of us have had a time where we've trained somebody. I mean, you worked hard, you poured your life into them, you trained them, and then it turned out bad. They didn't do it. You know, they left the company, they left you, they hurt you, they backstabbed you, they did all kinds of. How many of you have ever had a bad experience trying to train someone? Raise your hand. Oh, yeah, 100% in the studio. How many of you are sitting beside that person today? Now, see, you've learned. Now your hand doesn't go up anymore. You know better. You know better. Okay. Now, a lot of times, it's just a bad experience. I've had that happen to me. I can remember as a young leader taking a very promising young guy, younger than me. I was already in my 20s, so he was really good. And pouring my life into him for about 3 years, and only to have him just mess up. And I remember I said to myself, I'm never going to do this again. I am never going to do this again. I'm done training people. In fact, I thought, when I hire people from now on, instead of pouring my life into them, I'm going to keep them at a distance. And for the next 6 months, when I brought a couple people on my staff, I kept at a distance. And one day I realized that if you don't allow a person to get close to you, if you don't pour your life into them, the good news is they probably won't hurt you. But the bad news is they'll never help you. They'll never be able to come alongside of you, truly alliance and partner with you. What a bad experience. A lot of times we just have bad experiences. I'm never going to do that again. And so therefore, we fail to empower people. Number 4, ego. Just ego. Just the fact, hey, a lot of times we don't empower anybody because we want the credit. Isn't that true? You know, we think, my goodness, I empower this team. They're going to get some of the credit. I'd like to have it all. Number 5. Codependency. I think sometimes we are codependent with others. In other words, basically what we're saying is I need you and I want to keep you close to it. If I empower you, I might free you up to let you go. And I put it in there because it's a true statement. You can't lead people if you need people. Now, don't take that statement to the extreme. Don't go back and say, boy, I don't like people. This is awesome. I have the first quality of being a great leader. No. If you need them, and the reason you can't lead them if you need them is if you truly need them in a codependent way, you'll never make the hard decisions because you need their approval too much. By the way, as I close out the law of empowerment, I just want to say to you that this has been a law that has been very important to me since I've turned 50, now much older. I've come to the conclusion for me, now this is just for me, that my greatest joy and my greatest fulfillment is in adding value to others. And I can say at this stage of my life, other people's success brings me more joy than my own success. And I don't mean that wrong, because I still like to hit the ball out of the park. And every once in a while I get the chance to hit the ball out of the park. But to train and teach someone else to do that, it's a greater joy. You know what? I kind of know what I can do. But when I pour my life into others and I see what they can do, it begins to compound as far as the return. It begins to, instead of to add, it begins to multiply. And so I kind of close this law by saying that I have found that adding value to people is very important to me. And I basically try to guide my life so that every day I can positively take people to another level. And I found three things about adding value to people that is just absolutely huge. And the first thing I found about adding value to people is this: that you can only add value to people if you truly value people. If I don't value you as a leader, I'll manipulate you instead of motivate you. And it's never right. So the only way that I can ever add value to you is truly value you. And secondly, I only can add value to people when I know and relate to what they value. I've got to know and relate to what they value, because I can't add value to them if I'm on a different page. I've got to know what their interests are and what their goals and mission and passion is. Those are important. So I can only add value to you if I know and relate to what you value. And thirdly, I can only add value to you and to others when I make myself more valuable. In other words, I've got to keep growing. Because if I don't keep growing, I cannot pass on to you what I'm learning. Because you cannot give what you do not have. So how do I stretch you? By stretching myself first. How do I add value to you? By adding value to myself first. How do I grow you? By growing myself first. By making myself more valuable, then I can add value to you. And that's what the law of empowerment is all about. Taking people to a higher level than they would have ever gone on their own. But because you willed it and gave permission to it, you empower them.
Okay. As I said, I'm not going to talk much between this time because we need to make some progress here. But the law of empowerment is a powerful law. And I think we've all ran into people who had a hard time empowering others, leaders who had a hard time empowering others. One way you can tell a leader who doesn't empower others is they won't give other people credit. They take all the credit. And while they know they couldn't do it alone, they don't want other people to know they couldn't do it alone. And so the law of empowerment is a powerful one. Let's just go on to the next one, which is law number 13, the law of reproduction. The law of reproduction. It takes a leader to raise up a leader. The law of reproduction. It takes a leader to raise up a leader.
Law number 13, the law of reproduction. The law of reproduction says we teach what we know, but we reproduce what we are. And I'm going to talk to you in this law about reproducing what you are. Now, isn't this interesting? This is a cousin. The law of reproduction is a cousin to the law of magnetism. Remember, the law of magnetism says who you are is who you attract. Now we're saying the law of reproduction, it takes a leader to raise up a leader. Now, the law of magnetism is kind of like the front end. The law of magnetism says, here's how you draw potential leaders to you. The law of reproduction is the back end. The law of reproduction says, once you draw these potential leaders, here's how you develop these potential leaders. We're going to begin talking now, and as you go through the laws of leadership with me, one thing you're going to realize is that as we get closer to the end of the laws, we get more into reproducing ourselves. The first laws deal with how do I develop myself, and how do I become the person I should be, those kind of things. And then we begin to shift from me as a leader to how effective I am as a leader to reproduce other people within my life. Here's what I know. We teach what we know. We reproduce what we are. It takes a leader to know a leader. What I've observed is that leaders can pick out potential leaders better than non-leaders. Are you with me? Because they have an understanding of what it's like to be a leader. So, it takes a leader to know a leader. Secondly, it takes a leader to show a leader. In other words, it takes a leader not only to be able to know one or to find one, and so therefore the people that find potential leaders are leaders themselves, but it also takes one to model or to show or to be an example or another leader, because the greatest motivational principle in life is people do what people see. So if you're a leader, guess what? You can teach leadership to others. That's why it's impossible for non-leaders to raise up leaders. It's impossible for non-leaders to train leaders. A lot of times I'm asked the question that why is not leadership taught more in the educational, academic, college type of setting? And the reason I say that is because there aren't a lot of leaders there. And you can teach a leadership course, but if you're not a leader, you can't reproduce leaders. It takes one to know one. It takes one to show one. And finally, it takes one to grow. How do you grow potential leaders? By being one yourself. People do what people see. So in this law, I want to talk to you about reproducing leaders. I did a survey about 2 years ago that was very important. I was doing leadership conferences, and I asked leaders all over the country, I asked them this question. I said, what's the number one influence on your leadership life? In other words, if you could go back and say, I am a leader because, and fill out the blank, what would you say? 5% of the people that said, I am a leader because, said, I am a leader because of a crisis. In other words, something happened that somebody needed to lead, and they happened to be there because they had leadership intuitiveness, leadership leanings within them. They rose up, took the challenge, led, saw that they could lead, and pretty soon kind of became a leader back. So about 5% said they became a leader because of a crisis. 10% said they became a leader because they had what they call natural leadership gifts. They had the leadership leanings that I'm talking about. Now here's what's interesting. 85% of the people that I talked to in the conference and did the survey with on how and why did you become a leader said, I became a leader because another leader put me under their wing and mentored me. In other words, they came into contact with another leader, which goes back to the law of reproduction, and the law of reproduction says it's an absolute fact that it takes a leader to reproduce a leader, it takes a leader to know a leader, it takes a leader to grow a leader, it takes a leader to show a leader, it takes all those things. Leaders beget leaders. Now, here's the question. If leaders beget leaders, then why is it that I have come to the conclusion that only about 5% of the leaders reproduce other leaders? Because I've watched this happen. I've seen leaders who never reproduce other leaders. What most leaders do is they just have followers. They lead and people follow. Why is it that so few leaders empower other leaders, reproduce other leaders, develop other leaders, raise people up higher than themselves? Well, there are several reasons. Number one is they're insecure. Again, insecurity keeps us from empowering people. Number two, they spend too much time with followers. They just spend way too much time with them. And a lot of times they spend time with them because, let me just stop here for a moment. You know what followers do versus lead? If you lead followers, they'll stroke your ego all the time. They'll tell you how good you are, and you'll believe that foolishness. You know what I mean? And they'll say, oh, I couldn't make it without you, and oh, you believe I'm that, you know. And you just, followers just stroke your ego all the time. Leaders won't do that. Leaders are restless. They're saying, you know, you're doing a good job leading, but can we hurry it up a little bit more? Could we take on a bigger challenge? When are we going to? I mean, leaders following leaders, their main goal isn't to thrill you. Their main goal is progress, success. They want to get to the top. Thirdly, this is so true. Followers are easier to find and lead than leaders. Boy, isn't that the truth? One of the reasons we have so many followers is because we like it, because followers just follow. I mean, it's hut, 2, 3, 4, hut, 2, 3, 4. They just kind of get in line. And you see, leaders, hey, they're hard to find. Oh, they're hard to find. They don't fly. Turkeys fly. Eagles don't fly. You never gone outside and said, oh my goodness, I couldn't even see the sun today. There was just thousands of eagles just blocking the sun. Eagles don't fly. Turkeys fly. They're hard to find. They're not hard to find, they're hard to get. And when you find them, they're not waiting to join your team. One of the best advice I ever received in trying to recruit good people to my team was this advice. Find somebody that is already fulfilled in a job that they're doing with excellence and go after them. The person who wants a job, you don't want. The person who's looking for something is not the one you want. Hello. There's a reason why they're at the depot waiting for the train. Being available is not a qualification. So they're hard to find. When I say they're hard to gather, because you know, when you ask a leader to join your team, they don't just say, oh, thank God, we're waiting for a team to join. No, they ask questions. They say, where are you going? How long are you going to be there? What's it cost? Can I drive? They're hard to find, they're hard to gather, and they're hard to keep. Because they're restless. And if you're not going somewhere, as soon as the train slows down, they're off. It's very important in being able to reproduce leaders, by the way, that you be able to find potential leaders, because your greatest odds of reproducing a leader is to find any potential leaders. Think about it for a moment. If you got two people in your organization, one's a potential leader, I mean, they've got some potential leadership gifts, and the other person has no leadership gifts. Wow, you want to spend your time with a person that has potential leadership gifts. So you have to know how to see them. You got to know how to find them. You see, when I go to the airport, there are two kinds of people that pick me up. If they don't know who I am and they have never seen me before, there are two kinds of people that pick me up there. The first kind of person, they just take a piece of paper and they put my name on top. And they stand somewhere where you play. They're standing over there on the other side of the hallway. And they got my name in the air. And they're just hoping I see their name. They just got in, they're talking to me, talking with their buddy. They got name in the air. The other day I was in the airport. Somebody said they had a name in the air. I didn't see my name in the air. I passed them, went right on to the hotel without it. They panicked, called me an hour later. Oh, you're here. Oh, thank God you're here. See, if all you do is stick a leader's name in the air and hope, you miss a lot of leaders. But there's another way to find leaders. Some people, when they come to the airport, they have one of my books. And they go to the back of the book, and it's got my picture. Hopefully it's a newer book. And they've got my picture. And you know what? They're by the line with people that are playing, and they got this picture of me. And they know what I look like because they got my picture. And everybody comes up with their business number. Here's John Maxwell. They come up and they shake my hand. How did you know I was John Maxwell? It's very simple. It was easy to find you because I had a picture of what you looked like. That's huge. You see, if you have a picture of what a leader looks like, you can find potential leaders. If you can find potential leaders, you increase your odds of reproducing potential leaders. Number 4, sometimes we don't develop other leaders because they fail to recognize the value of developing leaders. They've never realized the compounding value that if you develop leaders, you grow your company, your profits, your bottom line is bigger. Everything wins when you have leaders in your organization. Number 5, leadership has been viewed many times as a competitive effort and not a cooperative one. So many times we've looked at people and thought of them as competitors. And you know where I think we got that? I don't know, this is just me. I think we got that from when we were kids. How many of you when you were kids played the game Follow the Leader? Boy, I played that game. And you know what the goal of the leader was? The goal of the leader was to do things that the followers couldn't do so that the leader could stay the leader. So I grew up in a culture that said, if you're really good, people will never be as good as you. And therefore, you get a lead. And so therefore, I protected leadership by being able to do things that others couldn't do. And I think it puts within us a competitive nature that we don't even understand. And as we grow up, we carry that over to even the corporate world in our life of saying, I still got to go do things that other people can't do, so I'll establish myself as the leader.
I guess that was the end of that one. So good stuff, the law of reproduction. And I think one of the big problems, as he's talking about, is a lot of people can't recognize leaders, but also when you have one, if you don't know how to treat them and use them, they're going to go somewhere else. Here's an interesting concept for those of you that might be going into pastoral ministry or you know, you've got a department under you. There's a fine line between putting people to work too quick and putting them to work too late. And what I mean by that is, I have a conviction that when people come into the church, they ought to sit there for a while to get a feel for who we are and how we think and how we operate, rather than just, they're a warm body, they walk in the door, get them working. Because I think they need to understand something before they begin working. But at the same token, if they're leaders, leaders don't like to sit. See? Leaders want something to do. And if you don't give them something to do, they're gone. Why? They're looking for something to do. So there's this fine line that you have to deal with, that balance. And so a lot of times I think churches lose people and lose good people because we didn't recognize the concept that a leader has to have something to do. Here's another concept. If you've got a bunch of leaders around you, give them a job or they'll try to take yours. And that's true, you know. Give them something to do or they'll try to take yours. So any questions on either one of these, questions or comments you'd like to make on the two we watched? It's just some good information. Absorbing it takes some time. Okay, well, number 14 is, let's see what number 14 is here as we get ready for it. The law of buy-in. The law of buy-in. In other words, people buy into the leader, then the vision. The law of buy-in, which says that people buy into the leader, then the vision.
The 14th law of leadership is the law of buy-in. B-U-Y. Buy-in. The law of buy-in says people buy into the leader, then the vision. When I hold leadership conferences many times, a leader of an organization will come up to me and they'll say, John, I've got this huge vision, got this big dream, just about to share it with my company, about to share it with my department. And they'll ask me the question, all the time they'll ask me this question, what do you think? Do you think that my people will buy into my dream? Whenever they ask me the question, I say, let me ask you a question. Have the people bought into you? Because if the people have bought into you as a leader, can I tell you something? There's good news. They'll buy into the dream. But if they haven't bought into you, can I tell you, they'll not buy into the dream. It's never happened where an organization has bought into the vision without buying into the visionary. So the first thing that you sell is not your dream. The first thing you sell is not the vision you have. The first thing you sell is yourself. Because when you can connect, goes back to the law of connection. When you can touch a heart, you can ask for the hand. In other words, when you can touch them relationally, when they have bought into you emotionally, when they like you, when you're at least on level number 2 on the 5 levels of leadership, when they have bought into you, then they'll buy into the dream. So the first thing you want to do is you want to always sell yourself. And then you can sell your dream. But it's impossible to sell your dream if you haven't first sold yourself. You see, every vision is filtered through the messenger. So therefore, when I hear a vision or when I have a dream presented to me as a leader, it's an absolute fact that every one of those dreams and visions are filtered through who gives the dream and who shares the vision. I've often said it this way. The leader finds the dream and then the people. That's the way it works. As a leader, I have a vision or I dream, and I got this vision dream, and I say, okay, I've got to go find some people to fulfill it because I can't do it all myself because it's a bigger dream than I have. So the leader finds the dream and then the people. The people find the leader and then the dream. Most people go throughout life without the dream or the vision. So they have to find a leader that has a dream or a vision that's compatible with them. But in staying long enough to find out what the leader's dream is and what the vision of that leader is and where that leader is taking them, they also realize, I've got to buy into this person. I've got to like them. If I'm going to take a journey with them, I've got to relate to them. I've got to connect with them. They have to like me. They have to believe in me. They have to relate and connect with me. So the law of buy-in is absolutely huge because what we have to understand is that our job as a leader isn't to sell the dream first. Our job as a leader is to sell ourselves first. And with the selling of ourselves and the connecting with people, they connect to the dream. Again, how do I take the vision from me to we? The law of buy-in. If they buy into you, it will soon be their vision, not just your vision. You know, there are some questions, therefore, that I have to ask as a leader. The question is not only do I have a clear vision, the question that I need to ask is, do I love my people? Do I enjoy being around them? Do I have a good relationship with them? Do they love me? Do they enjoy being around me? Is it a good time when we're together? Because the leader, again, understands in the law of buy-in, there has to be the human connection before you can take it to a higher level. What I want to do to make this lesson real practical for you is I have what I call the buy-in process that I want to give you. I want to share with you what is the process that helps people buy into you as a leader and then buy into your vision. Here's where it starts. Number one, the people see the problem. In other words, there's a need that people sense and feel and understand, and they say, oh my goodness, we have a need or we have a problem. That's the first step to the buy-in process. There's just what I call the obvious need or the obvious problem. Step one. Step two, the leader sees the problem and the potential. Now that's what distinguishes the leader from the follower. the follower sees the problem. In fact, the follower is frustrated and basically has no answers and basically thinks that his or her hands are tied. And so they're frustrated with the problem, but the leader sees the problem, but the leader also sees the potential. That's what makes a leader. Remember, leaders are dealers in hope. Where most people see the dead end street, they see more than the dead end street. So, one is the obvious need that there's a problem. Secondly, there's a leader who sees not only the problem, but the potential. Third, the leader has a plan. Now, this plan usually is a vision, but it's a plan. They not only see the problem, but they've got a plan on how to fix it. And in seeing this problem and seeing this plan how to fix it, remember, now they are beginning to be what I call tangible dealers in hope. It's one thing just to get up and say, it's going to be a better day. It's another thing to get up and say, it's going to be a better day, and here's why, and lay out a plan. One statement gives people hope for the moment. The second statement energizes and empowers them for the long run. So, there's a problem that's obvious. There's a leader who sees the problem but also sees the potential. And that same leader, thirdly, develops a plan of how this problem can be solved. Number 4, the leader believes in the people. As we studied in the law of buy-in, that you have to buy into the people before you buy into the vision. And by the way, that's 2 ways. The people have to buy into the leader before they buy into the vision, and the leader has to buy into the people before he or she can get them to buy into the vision. There's a buy-in almost. So this leader not only sees the problem, sees the potential, has the plan, but has bought into the people, which brings us to step number 5. The leader believes in the future. Not only does the leader believe in the people, the leader believes in the future, and basically, again, has great expectation of what tomorrow will bring. And step number 6, the leader shares this belief with the people. In other words, the leader gathers people around and says, let me tell you what I think can happen. Here's the plan. Here's what I believe is going to happen. Which brings us to step number 7. The people believe in the leader's belief. I've seen this happen time and time again. The people believe in the leader's belief. Even before, quote, they get it, they've got it. They've bought in emotionally to the leader, and so therefore, as they've bought emotionally into the leader, they begin to buy into emotionally the leader's plan, the whole process. Now, when those 7 things happen, the 8th thing is absolutely automatic. The people buy in to the leader. They just buy into the leader. Now, sometimes this gets to the law of respect, because the law of buy-in is a cousin to the law of respect. They're similar laws. They're different. One is based on emotional understanding and relationships. That's the law of buy-in. The law of respect is based on credibility and the ability to produce. So they're different, but they're cousins. Now, here's what I know. I can remember I was a leader of an organization several years ago, of which I followed an excellent leader who had been in that position for 27 years. You talk about taking time before people gave you respect or buy-in. For the first year and a half, all I heard was how good the last leader was. And you know what? He was that good. Instead of being jealous or instead of trying to pull him back, I bought into his leadership and talked about how good of a leader he was and how valuable he was to the organization. But I just kept doing my job with excellence. And what I found was this. Almost 2 years later, I began to sense the law of buy-in. Now, nobody got up one day and said, hold on, wait, Chuck. Law number 14, the law of the body. There was no such law back then. I hadn't written the book. But I knew they began to buy into me. I knew they began to buy into me because they started coming to me and asking for leadership counsel. They began to initiate questions. And they also began to initiate affirmation. They began to talk to me about how I was helping them and how they realized where the organization was, and now the organization was so much better. And all of a sudden I realized, when you truly have the law of buy-in as a leader, you don't need to ask the people. They'll start coming forward, and they'll start giving you that buy-in. You'll know it because the people will share it.
Okay. So the law of buy-in. And I think one of the problems that leaders have, if they're not careful, is they're expecting people to buy in just because they're the leader. And people don't buy in just because you're the leader. You know, another way, and this is a Maxwellism from years gone by, is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so they've got to buy into you before they buy into the product. And if you don't give them something worth buying into, you know, you've got some problems. So very good. Very good. Number 15, the law of victory. The law of victory, which says leaders find a way for the team to win. The law of victory. Leaders find a way for the team to win.
Law number 15 is the law of victory. And the law of victory says leaders find a way for the team to win. In other words, leaders have the ability to bring victory to the people. In your notes, I have this statement: victorious leaders find the alternative to winning unacceptable. So they find out what needs to be done to achieve victory. And then they go after it with everything at their disposal. Now, if you'll let me just use a sports illustration just for a second. Classic example of somebody that understood the law of victory was Michael Jordan. Just had the ability to bring the team to victory. And even when he went over to the Washington team in the NBA, a team that had been low, and they almost made the playoffs. Why? Because anything less than victory is unacceptable to Michael Jordan. You show me a person, a leader, that does this all well, and I'll show you a person that absolutely hates losing. As I've looked at the great leaders in history, they all excel in this law. Whether it's in our country, George Washington, who absolutely is determined to allow our country to be free from British rule, and stakes his life in 6 years, never hardly goes home to stay out there with his soldiers as they are undermanned and underrated to make sure that they bring this victory home, and finally he does. Whether it's a George Washington or an Abraham Lincoln, who knows that the bloodiest time in our history is going to be a civil war, but is willing to go through those dark hours so that we can eventually take this injustice off of our African American and friends and bring us to a new day. All of the great leaders understand and bring forth the law of victory. Perhaps my favorite leader of all is the leader of England, Winston Churchill, during World War II, who absolutely refused to allow the Nazis to gain control of Europe. And in the darkest hours, spoke great words of victory to his people. I love the statement I have in your notes about him. Winston Churchill asked the question, what is our aim? I answer in one word: victory. Victory at all costs, victory in spite of all terror, victory however long and hard the road may be, for without victory there is no survival. So, what does the law of victory look like? Let's put a picture on it so we can understand it. Let's make the law of victory tangible. First of all, leadership is responsible. You show me a leader that brings his or her team to victory, and I'll show you a leader that takes responsibility. They take responsibility when defeat happens. They take They say, look, it's my problem. I was the leader. So the first part or component of the law of victory in leadership is that the leader takes responsibility. No excuses. Boy, don't you know some people? Every time there's a problem, they got 17 reasons why it's not them. Huh? If and but and if and but. If ifs and buts were candies and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. The other day, I love this. I picked this up. This is just some true explanations why people have automobile accidents, as reported to the police when they were doing the report. And some of these excuses just crack me up. Such as this person said, as I reached an intersection, a hedge sprang up. Hedges will do that often, obscuring my vision. Wasn't my fault. The hedge grew fast. An invisible car came out of nowhere, struck my car and vanished. The telephone pole was approaching fast. Those moving telephone poles do it every time. I attempted to swerve out of its path when it struck my front end. I hated when telephone poles do that. The indirect cause of this accident was a little guy in a small car with a big mouth. I had been driving my car for 4 years when I fell asleep at the wheel and had an accident. After 4 years, you'll do that. I was on my way to the doctors with rear end trouble when my universal joint gave way, causing me to have an accident. To avoid hitting the bumper of the car in front, I struck the pedestrian. Makes perfect sense to me. I was coming home, pulled into the wrong driveway, and hit a tree that I did not have. The pedestrian had no idea which direction to run, so I ran over him. Make up your mind. Make up your mind. The guy was all over the road, and I had to swerve a number of times before hitting him. This was not easy. This was not easy. I pulled away at the side of the road, glanced at my mother-in-law, and headed over the embankment. That's probably the only one that wasn't an excuse. Now, it's just simple. The law of victory says, very simple, leaders take responsibility. Own up. The second thing the law of victory looks like is losing is unacceptable. Losing is just not acceptable. Thirdly, passion is unquenchable. You show me a person in the law of victory, and I'll show you a person that is passionate about winning. Creativity is essential. Why? Because you're going to have to constantly be creative to work yourself out of messes to bring victory. Their victory is not an escalator to the top. Quitting is unthinkable. They will not quit. Commitment is unquestionable. And because of those preceding things, victory is inevitable. That's just a fact. I'm very fortunate because I have people around me who understand this law very well. And in my inner circle, they really do understand the law of victory. David Sutherland, who's the president of Enjoy Stewardship Services, that's an organization that raises money for nonprofit organizations. David, I many times go to him and I say, David, of all the people I know, you are Mr. Law of Victory. You just don't allow my team to lose. You don't allow my company to lose. You're going to make it happen. And I knew he was the law of victory when I brought him to my organization. It was very, very small. And it was right after Thanksgiving. I was over at the office one day and I saw the wife Roxine, and I noticed Dave was gone. I said, Roxine, where's Dave? Well, he said, John, his goal was X amount of contracts this year. He's 7 contracts short. So on Thanksgiving Day, he left and said, I hope to be home for Christmas, but I won't be home till I have the other 7 contracts. So Roxanne said, I'm not sure when he'll be home, but when he comes home, he'll have the contract. He came home 2 days before Christmas. All 7 of them signed. You see, Dave's a leader that isn't going to allow the team to lose. He just is not going to allow the team to lose. Kevin Small, who's the president of Enjoy, we got ready to put together a major leadership simulcast all over America with some of the major players such as Jack Welch and Rudy Giuliani and that whole process. And I can remember the day that Kevin came to us and said, I want to do this simulcast. And my brother and I looked at him and said, well, it's going to take a lot of money, and you're going to have to probably have a cash flow issue. And the only way we're going to let you do that is if you go out. And we threw out and said, you're just going to have to get leaders like Jack Welch and Rudy Giuliani for us to do this simulcast. So you're just going to have to make it so great that everybody's going to want to watch it. He disappeared. And I went to his assistant. I said, where's Kevin? She said he went after Jack Welch and Rudy Giuliani. Said he would be back when he had it. 8 days later, he came back with signed contracts. Jack Welch, Rudy Giuliani, and an all-star team of life. You see, Kevin understands. He understands the law of victory. It's just a very simple law. It's a law that basically says, if you're a leader, you realize your responsibility isn't to get across the line first. Your responsibility is to take everybody that's on your team across the line. You see, the law of victory is not an individual award. The law of victory is not an individual trophy. It basically says, because you got across the line and helped everybody else get across the line, you took everybody on your team to a higher level. The law of victory says, yes, you won, but so do all the players around you. The law of victory can probably be expressed best in the words of Bill Russell, who said after every basketball game with the Boston Celtics, which he led to many world championships, he said, after every game, I evaluate my game not based on how well I played. I evaluate my game on how well the players around me played, because he said my main job is to make them all just a little bit better. So the law of victory is not a single award for a single person doing a single job. No. You see, you're a leader. Leaders don't go to the top by themselves. Oh, they go to the top. But when they go to the top, they're like my friend Jim Whittaker, who took 20 people to the top of Mount Everest. He said, the greatest joy is not getting there myself. Once I did it, I knew I could do it. Now the question is, can I bring victory to everybody else? That's the law of victory.
Okay, I don't think we need to talk much about that. Good stuff. We're making progress here tonight. Number 16. Oh, this is one of my favorites. I mean, I've got quite a few favorites, but this is one of my favorites. Number 16 is the law of the Big Mo. And what the law of the Big Mo says is momentum is a leader's best friend. Momentum is a leader's best friend. The law of the Big Mo.
Law number 16 is the law of the Big Mo. The law of the Big Mo says momentum is a leader's best friend. I have found this to be very true. In fact, with momentum, here's what I have found. With momentum, you can solve problems so much easier than if you don't have momentum. So let's talk about it for a moment, and grab one of your notes for a moment. I'll walk you through some fill-in-the-blank stuff, then I want to do some teaching. First of all, many times the only difference between winning and losing is momentum. But let's understand what momentum will do for you. Just as the law of intuition gets a leader started quicker so that leader can win the race, the law of momentum sustains the victory longer. Momentum allows you to be successful for a longer period of time. An expression they use in the sports world, and you've all heard it, is when a team has got momentum, the sportscaster will say something about, like, they're playing over their heads. What's it mean when they say they're playing over their heads? What it really means is they've got momentum going for them. And when they got momentum going for them, things began to turn out great. And here's why, in your notes, momentum is the great exaggerator. In other words, momentum takes what is and exaggerates it. Stay with me in your notes. Momentum makes leaders look better than they are. That's why I call it a leader's best friend. In other words, think about it for a moment. Just stop for a moment. When you've got momentum, people think you're better than you really are. And isn't it fun to be a leader and have your people think you're really better than you really are? And they're just saying, oh my goodness, what a leader. And you realize that you're not quite that good. Now, you don't want to stop the momentum and tell people that. But it's a great exaggeration. It makes the leader look better than he or she is. And momentum makes followers perform better than they are. It allows followers to perform over there. So what you always want to do is you always want to have momentum, because momentum is a leader's best friend. Now let me just take you to the reverse of this for a moment. When you have no momentum, or you have negative momentum, remember Paul Harvey's the one who said, you can tell you're on the road to success. It's uphill all the way. So every once in a while, I'm going to be able to say, you know what? This is just great. It just seems like everything's coming automatically. Well, that means they're going downhill. And it's only a matter of time. Now, let me tell you something. When you lack momentum, just as positive momentum exaggerates things in a positive way, negative momentum exaggerates things in a negative way. So, no momentum makes leaders look worse than they are, and no momentum makes followers perform worse than they are. In other words, momentum is the great exaggerator. If you've got it, you look better than you really are. If you don't have it, you look worse than you really are. Now, what I want you to understand about momentum is this. With momentum, it takes less energy to solve problems. What discourages organizations more than anything else is problems. What discourages people more than anything else is problems. And so what happens is that when problems begin to bog you down, it seems like momentum begins to ebb. Now, the reason for that is the fact that the problem becomes bigger than the momentum instead of the momentum becoming bigger than the problem. So let me explain to you the difference. Here's the difference. What I have found in teaching leadership is this. Managers deal mostly with problems. That's just the nature of who management is. They deal a lot with problems. And nothing wrong with it, because you got to deal with problems. Where management deals with problems and works on problems, what I found is leaders, they work on momentum. Leaders know that if they can create momentum, many of the problems they have in their organization will be solved. Let me explain to you what I mean. Here we go. A train going down the track, 55 miles an hour. I mean, that train's just coming. A train going down the track 55 miles an hour can crash through a 5-foot thick concrete wall, steel reinforced. It'll crash through that concrete wall and just keep on going. Why? Because it has momentum. It's moving down the tracks. A 5-foot thick concrete wall, steel reinforced, can't stop that train because it has momentum. That same train stopped dead on the track without any momentum at all. You can put a 1-inch block in front of the driving wheels, and that same train that could crash through a 5-foot thick concrete wall, steel reinforced, that same train with a 1-inch block in front of its driving wheels cannot even get started. This is a huge example of momentum. It works the same in companies. If you've got momentum in your company, you know what you can be doing if you've got momentum? You can smash through a 5-foot thick concrete wall, steel reinforced problem, and keep on going. If you don't have momentum in your company, you know what happens? I can promise you, if you don't have momentum in your company, there could be a 1-inch problem, and you can't even get started. That's why I tell people all the time, your problem is not your problem. In fact, the problem is, people think the problem is the problem. And the problem is not a problem, but because you think the problem is the problem. You work on a problem that's not a problem, but the problem wasn't a problem, now becomes a problem, not because it was a problem, but the problem is you didn't know the problem was a problem, so the problem was a problem, it becomes a problem because you didn't know the problem was a problem, so now you have a problem that wasn't a problem, that is now your problem because you didn't know the problem wasn't the problem. So melancholic in the back is raising her hand saying, John, could you repeat that one more time? I didn't quite get it. Now, here's what I'm saying very simple. You can either spend your life working on problems, or you can spend your life creating momentum. If you're going to be a leader, you're going to create momentum, I guarantee. You're going to create momentum because you know that momentum will solve almost all of your problems. Here's the way this works. Momentum will solve your problems, but if you deal with problems, you'll never get momentum. So you've got to get on the momentum side. And leaders understand that. Leaders realize that you've got to work on momentum. If you want to be successful, you've got to work on momentum. That's just where it is. So, because see, there are two kinds of people, and this is so important. It's in your notes, because I want you to be sure to get it. There are two kinds of people. First of all, leaders are like thermostats. They control the temperature. And followers are like thermometers. They record the temperature. And you got to ask yourself the question, am I going to set the temperature? Am I going to create momentum as a leader? Or am I basically going to go around and record what the temperature is like most followers? And this is a very important issue. So what I want to do is I want to talk to you about if momentum is so important because it helps solve most of the problems of the organization, how do I, as a leader, create momentum for my company? How do I create it for my department? How do I create it for my organization? How do you move the big mo? In the Laws of Teamwork book, one of the 17 laws of teamwork that I write about is the law of the big mo. I talk about morale. I talk about high morale. And you know what I say about high morale? When you're winning, nothing matters. Isn't that the truth? Boy, you see a team winning. You don't see a team walking slowly off the football field. Oh, it was a rough game. No, they're jumping up and down. They're excited. You know why? Because they've got the big ball. They've got momentum. When you're winning, nothing hurts. Can I tell you something? When you don't have momentum, it works like this. When you're losing, everything hurts. Isn't that the truth? So how do you move the big mo? How do you get it going? Number one, understand its value. Understand the value of momentum. As a leader, you've got to understand it. And the best way I can explain it, if you let me use a sports analogy again, what happens to coaches? Well, let's say, for example, I'm coaching and my team is losing, and all of a sudden we've lost momentum, and the other team is pouring up just pouring on the points. Okay, what do teams that are losing momentum? What's the coach do when the team starts losing momentum? Calls timeout. Now, why did the coach call timeout? Very simple. They realized that momentum is getting away from them. I wish every leader would understand what a coach understands. When you're losing momentum in your organization, call timeout. It's time to huddle. It's time to talk about the issues. Don't put your head in the sand and act like it's not happening. Say, look, we're not doing well. Let's talk about it. Let's turn this around. Let's get the big move going for us. So, number one, understand its value. Number two, figure out what the motivating factors are in your organization. Just figure them out. There are certain things in your organization that motivate your people. If you say, as a leader, I don't know what they are, it's very simple. Ask your group. Get to your team. If this is my leadership team, I'm going to go down and I'm going to say, okay, let me ask you a question. What motivates you? What really gets you excited? What gives you energy? They're going to tell you. They'll tell you what motivates them. They'll tell you what momentum they need in their life to go forward. So figure out the motivating factors. Number three, remove the demotivating factors in your organization. Now, we just did the opposite. You're feeding in the motivating factors, the demotivating. For example, I may be talking to my team. And what's your name? John. I may be talking to my team and I say, okay, John, let me ask you a question, John. What demotivates you? And John might say, you know what? In our company, it takes too long for me to get an answer. Man, 3 weeks ago, I wanted to know about something. I'm still waiting on the answer. All the bureaucracy and all the stuff, all the paperwork. I hate that stuff. And so I said, okay, John, what are your demotivating factors? Obviously, is bureaucracy, too much paperwork. So what do I do as a leader? I say, okay, let's see how we can give you direct lines so you can get your answers. Okay, what I'm saying is leaders instill motivating factors to get the momentum going, and they remove demotivating factors. Number 4, schedule times for direction and celebration. In other words, when you win, have a party. And when you have a party, always give them direction for the next step. One of the greatest mistakes I find in celebrating is too many organizations celebrate and it's just an end in itself. When you have a party over a victory, at the end of that party, say, you know what? Let me share with you where we want to go next. Always give direction at your celebration times. Always say, this is our next level. This is where we're going to go. Because people they already have momentum. They feel they can win. They feel successful. They feel good about themselves. They've got a victory under their belt. That's the time to give them the next challenge. Number 5, recognize and honor people who move the ball forward. Very simply put, find the people who move the ball forward, give them the credit, recognize it, get them up in front of the people, very important. By the way, if they're not moving the ball forward, don't applaud. It amazes me in so many organizations how we affirm people that aren't doing a good job. You've never seen a coach, when a ball player fumbles, stand on the sideline and clap and say, "Oh, meeting." No. So you recognize and affirm those who are doing the job. And number 6, practice what I call character leadership. And I would define character leadership this way. Character leadership is when I lead with enthusiasm and hope, and the future doesn't seem very bright. In other words, the average person, when things don't look good, they sag. Leaders, they suck it up and move forward and get positive, and they lead whether they feel good or not. Quit waiting to feel good to lead. Quit waiting for your first victory. If you've had a loss, put it behind you. Keep going. Have character leadership. Understand that as you go, so will the team go.
Okay. Big Mo. Boy, that's very true. When you have victories, celebrate those victories and keep momentum going. I think, and it's just as true, when there's no momentum, you got to stop. And you got to reorganize, and you got to figure out what's the matter here, how are we going to change this. Even when it comes to programs, sometimes you just need to stop the programs. What we tend to do is put a tourniquet on it or put it on life support. And some programs need to just die out of the fact that they're dying. Let them die and go on to something else. One thing that's hard for us to understand sometimes is just because a program served a need for 10 years doesn't mean it's going to serve a need for 10 more. However, when you're in churches, how many people complain when you stop something? Right? Because we've always done it that way. But, we have to realize that momentum is what we're looking for. And too often it's just not there. Anybody want to share anything or ask anything from tonight?
Sometimes, especially I found in church, you want to go on and you feel like you can maintain momentum, but you have to be submissive to the pastor or whoever's over you. So that's discouraging sometimes. So you feel like you could do it, but you're not always affirmed.
Right.
Or maybe the pastor, you have to realize you're in submission to the
Right.
leader. And so that leader, you have to believe that leader either knows something you don't, or, like you say, sees a need to stop that growth or whatever. And the other thing is, you have to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit. I heard in my spirit, not in audible voice. I was teaching Women of the Word at my church, and I've been teaching at night for about 10 years. We had 2 sessions a year. And I heard the Holy Spirit say, to me in my spirit, your time is up here.
Mhm.
And you need to stop and let somebody else do this, and told the person who was over me, the women's ministry leader. And the first thing they said to me was, did something happen to her feelings? And I said, no. It was so good to be able to just advocate and let somebody know.
Right.
The Lord had told me to stop.
Right.
But sometimes I just feel like your hands are tied, when you're under
Oh.
some leadership.
Well, and that's true. That's true. And but there again, submission is the key. And if it's wrong, it's on them. It's not on you.
Yeah, that's fine.
So that's the nice thing about not being the leader,
That's
too.
right.
It's on them. It's not on you. Okay. Number 17, the law of priorities. The law of priorities, which says leaders understand that activity is not necessarily accomplishment. The law of priorities. Leaders understand that activity is not necessarily accomplishment.
Law number 17, the law of priorities. The law of priorities says that leaders understand that activity is not necessarily accomplishment. So let's talk about that for a moment. Activity is not necessarily accomplishment. Some of these laws I do better on than others. There are some laws that I excel more than others. I want to just say that probably the 21 laws, this is my best law. I really do understand the law of priorities. And so let me give you a little bit of background. I'm working on a business degree in Indiana back in 1971, 72 in college. And I read in a textbook about the Pareto principle. A guy named Alfredo Pareto. It was the first time that I ever was introduced to what is known sometimes as the 80-20 principle. The first time that I've ever was introduced to it, and basically Pareto taught in that one paragraph in that book about priorities. And I remember reading that paragraph and saying to myself, this is very important to me. I need to learn priorities the way Pareto taught them. And so I became a student of Pareto, I became a student of priorities, and that was 5 years. That was well over 30 years ago. And I can tell you that when people look at what little things that I've been able to accomplish, and they come and say, how can you accomplish so much? I can always tell them with great integrity. This law right here, the law of priorities, I have worked on and I have excelled in. So let's look at your notes, because this is a terrific law to teach. I've already got a diagram for you, so let's just look at the diagram for a second. On the left-hand column is priorities. And by the way, since I'm doing some teaching on this, I want you to put a slice there, and I want you to also put the word people. Because I'm going to teach you priorities, but I'm also going to teach you how to prioritize your people in about 5 minutes. So, but for now, the left-hand column is priorities, and the right-hand column is production, and it pretty well explains itself. Here's what Pareto says. Pareto says that if you have 10 things to do, and you prioritize those 10 things correctly, if you only do 2 of them, but you do the top 2, you're going to get an 80% return on everything you need in your life. It's very obvious. You do 2 things, you go to the production side, 80% return. That's huge. Pareto goes on and says, let's say instead of doing the top 2 things, you do the bottom 8. You ignore the top 2. The most important things you ignore. And you do the bottom 8. Here's what Pareto says. If you do the bottom 8, if you go to the production side, you can see you're only going to have a 20% return. That's why it's sometimes called the 80-20 principle or the 20-80 principle. It's really talking about how to prioritize your life. And Pareto says, if you prioritize your life correctly, if you do just the 2 things out of 10 that you need to do, the most important 2, 80% of everything you want in your business, I can tell you this works in your family. If you prioritize your family time right, 80% of everything you need in your family, it's going to happen if you understand how to work the top 20%. What I have found is most people don't understand the 20-80 principle, and so therefore they don't put the time, energy, and effort in the top 20%, so therefore they don't get the return. Now, this is a great principle, but there are 3 questions, priority questions, that you need to ask yourself, that I need to ask myself, that helps me to establish this top 20%? Question number one, requirement. I've got to ask myself, what is required of me? In other words, I've got to look at my job. I've got to look at my company, my organization, the one that I work for. There are certain job descriptions. There are certain requirements of the job. And I got to basically say, okay, what do I have to do? Because whatever I have to do, I have to do. If I don't do those, I'm fired. So it's got to be a priority. True? So I got to ask what's required of me. The second word is return. I've got to look at all the things I do, and I have to ask myself this question: what gives me the greatest return? The third word is reward. I have to ask myself the question, what gives me the greatest reward? Now, those three questions I have found to be huge in understanding the 20/80 principle. But Alfredo Pareto says that if you prioritize your life correctly and you do the top 20%, you get an 80% return. And in that top 20%, I have to have those three R's. What's required of me, what gives me the highest return, and what gives me the greatest reward. See, I've got to ask the requirement question because if I don't do that, well, then I'm out of a job. I've got to ask the return job question because if I don't do that well, I'm not going to produce. And I've got to ask the reward job because if I don't like what I'm doing and I continually do it, it's only a matter of time until I quit. Requirement, return, reward. Let me illustrate. I only have 4 things that I have to do. In fact, when I tell people I only have 4 priorities, they look at me, they just kind of look at me and say, what do you mean you only do 4 things? What I mean is I only do 4 things. They say, well, no, I mean, don't you do other things? No, read my lips. Now, the reason I only do 4 things is a lot of reasons. One is I understand priorities. Number 2 is I'm kind of worthless in most things in life. It's just a gift, so it's not yours, so don't worry about it. Okay. But worthless I am. But the 4 things I do very well. And my whole team understands this. And they do everything around me so that I can stay focused on these 4 areas, because these 4 areas bring a huge return to me, to my companies that I have. So let me give you the 4 things. I'm only giving you these 4, not because these are going to be your 4, because they're not going to be. But you're going to have to go through the process, which literally took me months to go through, until you can settle in what your strengths are, what you need to be spending your time on. My 4 priorities are very simple. Number 1 is leadership. I lead well, so I spend a lot of time leading. It's a gift, and I know it. Number 2 is communication. I do it almost every day. I speak places, I lecture, I teach. I do a lot of communication. Why? Because it's a strength. The third is create or /write. I spend a lot of time creative thinking. I spend a lot of time in writing. Again, why? Because it's a strength of mine. I love to write books so that I can add value to people that I'll probably never meet. And the 4th area is in networking or relationships. Now, those are the 4 things I do. I either lead, communicate, create, or relate with other people. Those are the 4 things. I don't do anything else. You say, John, why don't you do anything else? Because I'm not any good at anything else. You've got to play to your strengths, not to your weaknesses. It's very important for you to understand. Listen to me carefully. People don't pay for average. They haven't paid for average in your life. They're not going to pay for average in my life. People don't pay for average. So quit trying to be average. Find out what you do well. Stay to your strengths, because that's the ace. That's what's going to bring you home. Now, these 4 areas, these are the 4 areas I stay in. I don't do anything else. Now, I have to have a lot of things done, so I have players around me that they complete me, and they do things for me that are huge on the team, that are vitally important. Now, I'm not saying these are the only 4 important things. I'm just saying, for me, these are the 4 things that I do. And these are my 4 top priorities. These give me the greatest return. These give me the greatest reward. You see, what Pareto is teaching you and me are the following lessons. He's teaching us, first of all, it's not how hard you work, it's how smart you work. He's teaching us that it's not how much time you put in the job, it's how you prioritize the job to be effective in it. He's teaching us things such as organize or agonize. In other words, get your act together, get organized, or you're going to always be behind the 8 ball and you're going to be agonizing because you're trying to always catch up. He's saying things such as choose or lose. Either you choose your priorities or you'll lose your priorities to somebody else that will choose them for you. The question is not will your calendar be full, the question is who will fill your calendar. He's saying things like evaluate or stalemate. Evaluate your priorities on a consistent basis, or if you don't, you're going to plateau, you're going to stalemate before long. Now, before I close this incredible law of priorities, let's go back to the diagram one more time. I want you to, instead of looking at priorities on the left-hand column, I want you to look at people. I wish I had 30 minutes to teach this part of the lesson. I'll try to do it in 30 seconds. If you have 10 people in your organization, or let's say you have 100 and each number represents 10, here's what Pareto says. If you have 100 people in your organization, if you prioritize them according to effectiveness in your company, 20 of those 100 people would be giving you 80% return on everything you need in your organization. And the other 80 would be giving you a 20% return. And what Pareto would be saying to me as leaders is, you better prioritize your people. And what he would be saying is, once you prioritize it according to effectiveness, here's what Pareto would say is, he would say, spend 80% of your time with the top 20% of your people. Because that's where the return is. Let me tell you what our biggest mistake is as leaders. I see it happening all the time. Instead of spending 80% of our time with our top 20%, do you know who we spend 80% of our time with? The bottom 20%. Because they've got questions and they want help and they've got an alley and oh, it's tough. We say, well, the top 20%, they don't need my time. The bottom 20% they need your time. Listen, you've got to decide whether you're going to be a counselor or an equiper. If you're a counselor, you're going to work with the bottom 20%. If you're an equiper, you're going to work with the top 20%. If you're a counselor, you're going to work on the weaknesses of people. If you're an equiper, you're going to work on the strengths of people. And I'll discuss that in another law coming up. Well, the law of priorities is absolutely huge. Basically, Pareto says, get your act together. Prioritize your life, prioritize your people, prioritize your time, and give 80% of the time to the top 20%, you'll get a huge return.
Okay, any questions or comments on that? Here's the concept of that principle, the 80-20 principle, when it comes to church. And listen carefully where I'm going with this. If you're not careful as a leader, as a pastor, you're spending, as he says, 80% of your time with the bottom 20%, bottom meaning those with the biggest needs. And if you do that, you're constantly going to be doing that. But if you spend 80% of your time with the 20% on the top, or by saying that, they've got things together, they worked on their dysfunctions, etc. You can train them to be your hand to the other 80%. So that in reality, everybody eventually gets ministered to. Because a pastor or one person can't minister to all those people. But we find ourselves doing it. Why? They need help and we love them. Okay? But you have to eventually pull away and train those who have the ability to help others, so that instead of there being one of you, there's 40 of you to minister to more needs. Here's the problem. When a pastor begins to do that, what happens when you take the bottle out of a baby's mouth? And they don't understand that it's not because you don't care, it's because you do care. But it doesn't always compute. That's why you have to work smarter, not harder, and figure out a way to make it happen. But it's a very, very important principle. Very important.
I'm glad you clarified that, because right away my mind was going to, where do I put the weak, that bottom 80%. I thought, well, they're needy. So
Yes.
But the way you clarified it makes sense.
And they are needy. That's why we have to develop people to help in that arena. And that takes time. And I think the only way that a pastor or a church can deal with it is to explain what we're doing. And even then, a lot of people won't understand. But you come to the realization after years of ministry, it's wearing you out, and you just can't do it. And it's not because, and so if you pull back, it's not because you don't care, it's because you do care. But not everybody understands it. So, very interesting principle. Number 18 is the law of sacrifice. The law of sacrifice, which says a leader must give up to go up. The law of sacrifice, a leader must give up to go up.
Law number 18 is the law of sacrifice. And the law of sacrifice says a leader must give up to go up. In fact, I can remember several years ago now doing a leadership lesson entitled, You Have to Give Up to Go Up. And in that lesson, I can remember my outline because it was very simple. I said, first of all, and it was about getting up the top, but I said, first of all, you have to get up to go up. Because I know all kinds of people, they're still in bed. You know what I mean? They're still in bed. They haven't realized, you probably ought to get out of bed before you can be successful. You got to get up to go up. That's step number one. Get out of bed. Enter into the arena of action. Take some initiative. Do something. Okay, you got to get up to go up. And after you get up to go up, after you do that, secondly, you got to grow up to go up. You got to grow up. I know people have never matured. They're still talking about the same thing, doing the same thing. They've never developed like you. So if you want to get to the top, you don't have to get up to go up. You got to grow up to go up. And then in the tape, I remember I talked thirdly in the leadership lesson about, well, you got to get up to go up. And that's what we're going to talk about in just a moment. And then the last thing I said is you need to gather up to grow up. You need to get your team together. If you really want to go to the top, you've got to gather up people because as I teach in the laws of teamwork, law number 4, the law of Mount Everest says, as the challenge escalates, the need for teamwork elevates. In other words, you've got to get a team around you, and you've got to get that team helping you to get to the top. So let's talk about the law of sacrifice. A few years ago, there was a tragedy at Mount Everest where a couple of guys got into a storm with a few of their people, and there were a few deaths. And I can remember a 60-minute interview that I watched. It's a very interesting interview because they were talking to one of the guides who, of course, lived, and they were talking about the tragedy. I think it was Mike Wallace, if I'm not mistaken, in that interview. And he asked a couple of questions that especially arrested my attention. One of the questions he asked was, why do you risk your life to take people to the top? And I remember the guide said, well, it's because that's my job. My job is to take people to the top. That's why they call me a god. And Mike Wallace says, well, couldn't you get to the top by yourself without harm or injury? And, oh, yes, I can do that. But it's my job to take people to the top. And the guy kept coming back to Mike Wallace and said, it's my responsibility. That's who I am. I'm a guide. And when I listened, I thought, how true to a leader that is. It's our job as leaders to take people to the top. Mike Wallace continued that interview, and then he looked at me and he said, I don't think it's worth the risk. I mean, after all, to risk your life or have people in your party and not make it noise, I don't think it's worth the risk. And then the guy said, why do you risk your life to get to the top of the mountain? And I'll never forget, that guy looked at him, and when Mike Wallace asked that question, the guy is looking into his face like, I can't believe you'd ask me that question. Why do I risk my life to get to the top? He looked at Mike Wallace and said, it's obvious to me that you've never been to the top of Mount Everest. It's obvious to me you've never been to the top of the mountain. It's obvious that you've never been there. If you would have ever been to the top, you would never ask that question. When I think of that interview, I think of leaders. Once we have been to the top and see how glorious it is, what do we want to do? We want to go back down and we want to find some other people and say, I want you to take a trip with me. I'm going to show you things you have never seen. I'm going to give you experiences that you have never experienced. That's what leaders do. Leaders have been to the top, and they want to take as many people with them to the top as they possibly can. Now, here's what I want you to understand. To get to the top, you've got to give up something. It was Emerson who said, for everything you gain, you must lose something. That's why I have in your workbook what I call the leadership pyramid. The leadership pyramid is a prime example of giving up to go in. Basically, the leadership pyramid says that when you enter an organization, yes, you've got all kinds of options left and right, but as you become a leader, and as you become a leader in that organization, the higher you go in this leadership pyramid, the less options you have. Now, I want to say that I teach this leadership pyramid all the time. I think that most leaders, and I think a lot of leaders in corporate America and in leadership organizations around the world, do not understand the leadership pyramid. For example, I run into leaders who all the time think that the higher they go, the more options they should have, the more perks they should have. I don't think so. I think the higher you go, the less options you have. I think that the greatest leaders are what I would call servant leaders. They're leaders who understand that they're a leader to make it better for the people. You're not a leader to make it better for yourself. Now, if you're a good leader, it will be better for you because you'll have the joy of taking people across the finish line. And there's no greater fulfillment and joy than that. So if you are a leader, if you're taking people across the top, it's going to be very good. But what I want you to understand is this. You don't lead because of perks. In fact, what I found is this. Most leaders, they become leaders because they like the perks of leadership. But most people have not counted the price of leadership. What you're going to have to give up, what you're going to pay. My dad taught me when I was just a kid. He said, John, pay now, play later. That's the way it works. And he said, if you don't pay on the front end, you don't get to play on the back end. In fact, he said, oh my, I'll never forget, he said, John, the longer you wait to pay the price, the higher it becomes. So learn quickly, pay on the front end. And I'm saying to each one of us today, as we're teaching this principle, the law of sacrifice, what we've got to do is we've got to understand that we have to pay on the front end. There's a price to pay to be a leader. It's not always easy. It's not always fun. In fact, when I teach leadership, one of the things I'm most concerned about is, why do you want to become a leader? Do you want to become a leader because you think there are a lot of perks in it for you? Or do you want to become a leader because you want to add value to people and take them to a higher level than they could ever go on their own? So let's go to the workbook. Because there are 3 sacrifice statements that I want to make. Number 1, there is no success without sacrifice. Let's just start there. You say, John, what do you mean? What I mean is, there is no success without sacrifice. There's not an escalator waiting to take you to the top. Quit standing outside waiting for the chairlift to take you to the top. Nobody ever got to the top of the mountain, and at the end of the day said, oh my goodness, how did I get here? It's just, I just took a stroll. The next thing I knew, I was on top of this mountain. No. You can fall off the top by accident, but you can't roll to the top by accident. If you get to the top, it's because you gave up something. And let me tell you something that all experienced mountain climbers will tell you. Before they take that big trip to the top, the main question they ask themselves is, what are the essentials I must take with me? Because they know anything except essentials will be a detriment to keeping them from what that goal is. So when they get ready to go to the top, they don't back up a U-Haul truck. Say, I'm going to throw this stuff in the truck. I may need it while I'm up there. No, they give up. They give up to go up. So there is no success without sacrifice. Number 2, the higher the level of leadership, the greater the sacrifice. That's a fact. The higher you go in your leadership, the more you'll give up. I remember thinking when I started off in my in my career, in my business to go to success. I remember thinking in the very beginning, boy, I was willing to do anything to get to the top. Of course it was. I didn't have to give up anything. Hey, when you have no money, it's not hard to give it up. When you have no position or reputation, it's not hard to give it up. You say, well, why was I so foolish as a youth? You weren't foolish as a youth. You didn't have anything. But as you grow higher, one of the reasons many leaders never get to the top is because as they go higher, they get more stuff. And they have to make these trade-off decisions that become very difficult for them. The third thing I want you to know about success is you have to give up to stay up. You not only have to give up to go up, once you get on top, you have to give it up. The reason most sports teams can do consecutive world championships is because after they win their first world championship, all the players go on the chicken banquet tour. They spend the next year getting fat, telling everybody how they did it last year. And you don't reproduce yourself by telling your story. You reproduce yourself. You stay on top by giving up continually. About 5 years ago, I did a lesson that really fits this whole law of sacrifice. It was entitled 10 Trade-Offs Worth Making. And it was a very important part of my own career where I was 50 years old. I was going to have to make some major changes, and I was going to have to give up some major wonderful perks and things I had in my life if I wanted to go to the next level. And I can remember that day as I sat down at my desk with my legal pad and I began to look at the trade-offs. Trade-offs such as I was willing to give up affirmation. People tell me what a good job I was doing for accomplishment to get to the next level. I was willing to give up financial gain for future potential. I was willing to give up immediate pleasure for personal growth. I was willing to give up the quantity of life for quality of life. I was willing to give up security for significance. I was willing to give up acceptance for excellence. I was willing to give up addition for multiplication. I began to work through all these things I was willing to give up. And I can remember making the conscious decision to keep on going. But I also remember, as I looked at that list, I realized that the higher you go, the price gets higher. That's why many people get about 2/3 of the way up and never climb any higher.
Okay. Good stuff, isn't it?